All right. I think I'm live. Welcome to Clubhouse Live. My name is Andrew Bisharat, and tonight I am here with my fellow writer, Ashley Shires. She's a psychotherapist from Boulder, Colorado. And we are talking about a super fun topic tonight, grief, for the American Alpine Club. So this is being broadcast on Facebook, and we're going to give a 20-30 minute presentation, talk about grief from personal experience, but also from clinical experience. And you can ask us questions, and you can do that on the Facebook page of the American Alpine Club, which is most likely where you are viewing this right now. I can introduce myself some more, but I'll let Ashley introduce herself right now.
Hi, it's an honor to be on, and really excited the American Alpine Club has this new arm, the Climbing Grief Fund, which has extended the invitation to Andrew and I to come on and just talk about writing as a resource and a tool to process grief. And my background is a writer. I have a master's in creative writing, and worked at Recognize a long time ago, back in the 90s, and have been teaching writing classes for years. And one of the powerful things I found in my classes, my students were saying they just didn't anticipate the therapeutic benefits of writing, and so that's what Andrew and I are both here to talk about today.
Yeah. So there's this new organization that our mutual friend, Madeline Sorkin, started and is under the umbrella of the American Alpine Club, called the Climbing Grief Fund. And it's obviously a relevant, important organization for the climbing world, all outdoor sports really, but it's particularly the climbing world is a place where lots of people die. And so having a healthy way to understand that and move through it, I think is something that we both support. And the topic tonight, we're both writers. I've been a writer in the outdoor climbing space for 20 years. I worked at Rock and Ice as an editor for about 9 years, and I'm a freelance writer now. I do all kinds of different writing, from strict journalism to creative stories to ghostwriting and everything in between to try to make ends meet as a freelancer. And so I had I also have a podcast that I do with my friend Chris Kalous called The Run Out. And a few months ago, we interviewed Hannah Taylor and Madeline Sorkin, the driving force behind the Climbing Grief Fund, to talk about grief. And during that conversation, I had this, it was really just a sense that writing could be part of this group. Because for me, writing has been a great way and a great tool to help process grief. And so I've been sort of looking for a way to give back to this community that has supported me and that I love, and it seemed like such a great way to, if there's any skill that I have, it might be to help people tell their stories. And so I came to Madeline with this idea of doing writing workshops or doing something along the realm of encouraging people to be open to writing as a way to face grief, process it, and move through it. And she was super psyched on that idea. And it's still a work in progress, but this is sort of the culmination of a bunch of conversations that we've had. Madeline found Ashley. I don't know if you guys were friends or knew each other.
You're our friend Kestrel, because I'm a registered psychotherapist, so also bringing the therapy background into looking at writing as a tool for grief. And so Kestrel was so kind to connect us all.
Yeah, and of course I know Kestrel too. So thanks, Kestrel, for that. But I was a little, I feel comfortable as an editor, as a writing coach, as a writer myself. I wasn't quite sure what the parameters are for approaching really difficult and emotional subject matter in this vein, if there's things that we need to be conscious of or not. And so that was one of my first comments to Madeline was, is there a person with some professional expertise that we can talk to who might be a little more clued in, or just have an understanding of what it means to encourage people to to face these difficult emotions. So I had some trepidation with jumping into this, and just so I'm happy that we've made this connection, Ashley, and that you bring so much relevant expertise to this conversation, being a registered psychotherapist, being a writing coach, and being a climber yourself, and also having personal experiences with loss that you've experienced yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate coming on, and really writing is a passion of mine. And I, with the therapy, I got really interested in kind of narrative psychology and studying, I knew that writing made me feel better. And my students were also saying, like, this is really therapeutic. Sometimes after writing something difficult, there's, of course, those feelings of, brings up the sadness and the grief. But we'll talk about it later, but there's some really fascinating studies on the long-term benefits. And one of my favorite researchers, James Pennebaker, just talks about after grief or loss or traumatic events, people are more prone to depression. And writing, he wondered, we know that secrets make us sick, or, this was his theory, like, if we write it out, is that going to help us process the grief, make meaning from it? And what would the benefits be? And so there's some interesting research on that we'll touch on later. And then I'm thrilled to be here on Andrew, who has all these really powerful pieces on his own process with grief and losing some really close friends, and writing about that, and what a difference that has made.
Yeah, so if there's a goal I guess the purpose of this conversation is for Ashley and I to come here and be advocates for writing as a tool for grief. Writing has been an extremely important part of my life, professionally, but most importantly, it's been a tool for me to understand difficulty and complexity and try to make some meaning out of it. And I don't need to draw the obvious parallels here. It should be obvious that, when you're grieving or in a time of loss, that all of those complexities and difficulties they're sort of like the biggest barriers to finding some sense of understanding with what you're dealing with. So for me, writing has been a process, or it's been a tool that I've used for as long as I can remember, whether it's through journals or expressing myself publicly, to really, understand what's going on in my head, and try to organize ideas, organize thoughts, and come to some you can come to some surprising insights and conclusions through that difficult process of putting words on paper, in a way that I can't do if I just sit there and think about it, in a way that I am incapable of doing, being an extreme introvert, in the presence of other people and sitting down and talking about stuff. I really need to be by myself with a pen and a paper or a laptop, to be able to process emotion, to understand complexity. And so I think that's the goal here, is to, if anyone is struggling with grief, you know, we all are to some degree. We want to open that avenue of writing being this tool that you can use, and that's an amazing tool.
Andrew, do you want to use some of the examples of the pieces that you've written? Because you've written some really powerful pieces that I know have made a difference for you and also for people who've read them.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we can get into all this. Do we, let's see, do we want to first do you want to talk about just the benefits of writing from a
Sure.
clinical perspective? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and we've got a couple slides. So, as I mentioned earlier, after trauma and loss, it's known that people are more prone to depression and actual physical sickness. So the researcher that I like, the psychologist James Pennebaker, he's at the University of Texas at Austin, and did some experiments to see, you know, if people write out their grief, their difficult experiences, is it going to impact their mental and physical health? And the results are pretty stunning. Just by writing about these difficult experiences, and the control group just wrote about something neutral, but the people who wrote about difficult experiences reported 43% fewer doctor's visits than the control group. They experienced better sleep, less anxiety, better immune functioning, and less chronic pain, because chronic pain, migraines, back pain, this can also be triggered by depression, psychological stress. So there's been a ton of studies since then, more than 300 studies on expressive writing, and they all really point to the benefits of being able to work through. And there's one other slide on kind of the reasoning behind why writing can be so helpful. So our brains evolved to make sense of events. And in the face of traumatic loss, we sometimes go into fight, flight, or freeze, and our brains get stuck trying to make sense of this event. And by ruminating, it doesn't always help actually process it or figure it out. But writing it can create a narrative. So writing it can help us organize the event, the emotions. Pennebaker says, by writing, you put some structure and organization to those anxious feelings. It helps you get past them. And one of the most important ways to do that is our minds want to find meaning. And when something happens that's just so traumatic and it overwhelms us with grief, it can be hard when we're stuck in our heads to find meaning and to move forward from it. And so writing is just a really helpful way to do that. And Andrew and I talked about there's different prompts and different ways to go about the writing. I don't know if you want to go into that next, Andrew, or your examples.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's we can go there. You know, I guess one of the ways as I was thinking about how we're going to talk about this, I wanted to open this conversation up as wide as possible, because you know, I think that there's this question about whether we are grieving to begin with, whether we have grief, what that even means. And you know, one of the clearest examples of in the climbing world of like this sort of public grief that I can think of is back when Johnny Kopp and Micah Dash and Wade Davis died, and the outpouring of, it was kind of like this first post-internet era you know, loss of three amazing people, well-known people, inspiring people. And you know, I knew Micah. I didn't really know Johnny or Wade very well, but you know, I counted myself on the exterior perimeter of grief, and I knew, and so there was this. When I think a big part of how we think about grief in the climbing world is related to, you know, public figures, people who are actually pushing the limits or doing like the gnarly climbs, they're the ones who are often putting their necks on the line, and oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes they get killed. And so how we deal with that as a community is actually a really important thing. And I want to open the grief conversation up to be as wide as possible, because I think it's a really good thing that we feel, even if we don't know these people, we know of them, we know of their climbs, or inspired by them. We grieve when they die, and that's really important. And you should recognize that as grief, even if you don't have like a strong emotional connection to it. Recognize it as grief, and consider the ways that this might be something that you want to write about. Something, because it's that process of grieving that really makes us feel like we're part of a community. When I was in my when those guys died and I was in my 20s, I had this real cynical reaction to it. Like, people were, it was like when Princess Diana died, and like there was this outpouring of emotion, and I interpreted that in maybe a cynical lens. But now, now that I'm like an old washed up climber, I see that as like this really powerful thing, because it shows connection, and it shows a way to be part of a community. So
No, I agree with you. I'm glad you bring that up, because I think even if we don't know someone personally, there's that sense of loss, and like you said, the word community, because a lot of they say the building blocks of mental health are a feeling of safety, community, and kind of a satisfaction or contentment. And so that sense of community is really important. And when we have a loss in that community, it's important to acknowledge it.
So I guess, the things I want to talk about right now are, with my experience, are this sense of being on this, like, it's like an onion, there's like many layers. Like, those guys, their death impacted me in a way. I knew Micah, I climbed with him. I didn't know the other guys. It wasn't like a dramatic, life-changing event for me personally, other than I felt drawn into the climbing world through their deaths, and I wanted to offer support to the people who were in the most pain through their deaths. And then, as there's that old saying that the more, I guess, the longer you climb, the more dead friends you have. And so, that experience has proven true for me. And Dave Pegg was like this close, not quite like within the inner, to bring that metaphor in of the onion. It was like the middle layer, where Dave was someone I admired. When I was out of a job, he hired me and I chopped wood on his farm. I often went climbing with him. But he wasn't like my very best friend, but he was someone that I loved and was part of my world and community. And sadly, he took his own life. So he didn't die of a climbing accident, but which is also an important, I want to put a flag on that, climbers don't always just need to die in avalanches. They can kill themselves too. People die, and they're climbers. And this is all part of that conversation. And so with Dave, I spent a lot of time writing about him in the aftermath, and I had a lot of great memories of being in his company and climbing with him, and I put those into words for various, multiple times. I wrote several articles about him in the wake of his death. And he was a person that I I had this interesting experience of feeling what closure means for the first time. So, you know, his death was so sudden, I couldn't believe it. It happened, out of the blue. And he and I was with his very best friends, and we put together this great memorial for him. And that whole process of just like thinking about what Dave would want and thinking about the memorial and writing about it was left me feeling like closure. And I didn't know what that really meant until Dave died. This photo here is of on the left here, we have Michael Logan, son of Jamie Logan, a well-known boulder climber, also a great climber here, Hayden Kennedy, Chris Kalous, and Steph Bergner. So this was at Dave's memorial. These are the people Dave loved. This other picture on the right was taken just around the same time. It's me with David Lama, and who's since passed, and Hayden, who's since passed, and Colin Powick in the sunglasses, and me flashing the Wu-Tang sign for no reason whatsoever. So yeah, so the experience with Dave was interesting, but what the point I want to get to with him is that I can go back to reading things that I wrote about Dave now. It's been, I don't know, 6 or so years since he died, and I remember things that I've forgotten, that are they're absent from my consciousness, and I get to relive being with Dave. So that's yet another reason to put some of this raw emotion down on paper and record it, because you're preserving memories in a way that you might not have a photograph for, but you have this piece of writing. You have that little idiosyncratic facial gesture that person did that you put into your story. And it's wonderful. It's amazing to go back and read some of that stuff and relive that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ashley?
Yeah,
just to give me a break from talking.
Give you a break from talking. Yeah, again, just that, and also the power of community and storytelling. And you had written in that piece about Dave Pegg about how powerful it was to share stories with each other. And humans, we evolved as storytelling creatures, and it does help us organize and find meaning and connect with other people. And all the people in those photos who connected, and it just is a testament to the power of story. And honoring, like you said, honoring the memory and writing it down, and it helps validate the emotions and honor the person.
Yeah, and so before we jump into the next person, just as a reminder, you can ask questions for both Ashley and I on Facebook, on the American Alpine Club Facebook page. So feel free to ask us questions, because we're going to answer them after this. So to continue that metaphor of an onion, like the tightest layer, the closest inner circle person, when that person dies, it's grief on this entirely different level. And I've been unfortunate enough to experience that with my good friend Hayden, who was just one of the best rock climbers or alpinists, all around climbers of his generation. Grew up here in Colorado. I met him when I moved here. He was about 12 years old, and really just kind of starting to get really stoked on climbing, despite the fact that his father, Michael Kennedy, was a well-known alpinist, and had been climbing his whole life, as well as being the editor of Climbing Magazine for many years. And Hayden, he was into biking and skiing and stuff, and a little bit into climbing, but kind of in his teenage years, he sunk in and really became the expert alpinist, climber, skier, mountaineer that he was. Just one of the best, most talented people in the world. And Hayden had a really unfortunate, accident that happened where he took his own life. He was 28 years old. He was skiing in the backcountry in Montana in October of all months, and his girlfriend Ingrid and he both got caught in an avalanche. Inga died in that avalanche, and Hayden couldn't really bear the loss of her and killed himself that night. And man, that was a shock. I didn't see that coming. So yeah, so it was really painful to lose Hayden and Inga, and it was interesting because I had worked with Hayden in the months preceding his death on a story that he wrote from my website, Evening Sense, called The Day We Sent, Logical Progression. And I had started this series called The Day I Sent. And it's really just, I offer a platform to, any climber really who wants to talk, have the opportunity to write about this incredible experience of sending a route. And Hayden had been thinking about, I'd had an open invitation to Hayden for years, and it wasn't until his best friend, Kyle, died in Pakistan that he really started to think about what he wanted to write about. And he wanted to write about, he's the only person who's framed it as The Day We Sent. And so he talks about him and 3 other people climbing this route in Mexico. And it was really just this opportunity, like with all The Day I Sent stories, the best ones are the ones who can provide a bit about the route, but really it's about the growth and the people that you're with. And he approached this from a really unique perspective of diving into to his emotions and feelings and thoughts about his friends who had died. And so it's a really powerful piece, and it ended up being really haunting because, he was wrestling with this idea of whether, climbing is this gift or this curse, because we can lose so many people around us. Climbing has the power to take away everything, but also give us everything. And so I some of the best moments of my life with Hayden, or best conversations, involved talking with him about this story, and and working through his grief, basically, with his friends. And I, 2 days before he died, he had this, Inga had this accident, and he died. He emailed me, and he said that he was so psyched on the reception that his article was getting, and it felt like it had really given him a sense of closure and just comfort with the loss of Kyle. And that was so meaningful. And it speaks to what this topic is all about, which is how do we deal with these really tough emotions and tough situations when someone who's in our inner circle dies? And for Hayden, he got there through writing this piece. And I'm so, given that it's terrible what ultimately happened to him, but the idea that he was in a better place in respect to Kyle meant so much to me, and it was so important.
I think that piece was really powerful too, just because reading it, you see him grappling with those questions about climbing and connection and finding the meaning through writing. And it was, reading that was really moving, and just seeing the benefits that he got from it. And then reading the piece that you wrote after he died, it just, again, super poignant, but reading how writing had helped him, and then reading the letter that you wrote to him about grappling with his death was moving. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so that so it was interesting because we had been planning a trip to Fontainebleau, and so we were leaving within a week or something like that. And so of course we wrestled with our best friend just died. Do we go to Font or not? And ultimately it just felt like the right thing to do to go. But we did change our tickets to come home early for Hayden's memorial. But anyway, I was in France, and I'd been there about a couple weeks, and I just couldn't sleep. And I remember one morning I woke up at like 4 a.m. or something, and I don't think it was jet lag because I'd been there long enough to not be jet lagged, but I just woke up early, and I went down and sat at my computer and wrote this piece, this letter. It was a letter to Hayden. And I was just like crying my eyes out and sobbing uncontrollably while typing these words. And it was just like so painful to do. And the writing itself it's not good. It's not good writing necessarily, but through that process of just being able to sit down and just type out some feelings, I came to something to latch onto, which was that haunting line from Hayden's piece about wondering whether climbing is a gift or a curse. I latched onto that, and in my letter to him, I answered that question, and I answered it that climbing is a gift. And just because a gift is breaks later on or doesn't work, or it's still a gift, and that doesn't change the meaning behind being given it. And so for me, climbing is a gift. Hayden was a gift. The people who are close to all of us who die in climbing, that's a gift, and so that coming to that realization helped me in a way that I needed. And so that process was really important, and I don't think I could have come to that idea if I didn't sit down and just start typing and see where my mind goes. And so, that was very therapeutic. And that day we went climbing in Font, and I remember feeling light, and topping out the first boulder I did, and just being like, like this is what Hayden loved. This is what I love. This is it. This is all that there is. And we need to, I don't want to start just diving into cliches, but that was to ground the conversation, it was that process of just sitting down and just starting to write as if I was writing a letter or an email to Hayden. And, and being able to do that gave me that anchor to hold on to, that bit of clarity and meaning that was absent in the wake of something that felt so senseless and without meaning at all. And so I think that's often, especially as you get into that inner circle of how grief is personally impactful, the closer you get, the more meaningless it all seems, and the more difficult it is to process, and the more confusion there is. And being able to find something to hold on to, I think, is really, really important. And writing is that tool to do that.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, that also reading it was a gift. That it just was, writing it as a letter to him just felt so personal and emotional and relatable to losses that I've had. And in the writing process, we don't, never do we have to share our writing, but it can be it really can be a gift to other people to read about loss, because we all experience it and relate to the emotions and the grappling. And I found it really helpful reading your letter also, so that,
thanks.
Yeah, I think it can be personally helpful, and to others too.
So let's tie this into a knot, and then we can open this up to questions if anyone has them. And again, you can ask questions on the Facebook page at the American Alpine Club. So, one of the biggest barriers to starting a piece of writing is, where do I begin, or what am I doing? And that can be tough. So we just wanted to give people some constraints, because actually constraints are the best thing that you can give to any creative process. And so we have some ideas for a format that you can look at for writing. I'm waiting for that to come up. But basically, we have 3 ideas for formats. One would be a poem. A poem could be as short as, a single sentence, or as long as you'd like. But the poetry format is a powerful one, and it's one that I think people can latch onto without too much. You can approach your feelings a little more abstractly, which might be helpful for some people. I don't know if you have anything to add with the poetry format, Ashley.
Yeah, I think some people feel like the poem also has to be within a structure, but that's the beautiful thing about it. It doesn't. You can choose a poetic structure if you want, but also, like you say, Andrew, it can be just totally abstract, and sometimes that creative expression can be really cathartic.
Yeah, so
is the letter that you were just talking about.
Yeah, the letter to the deceased. I just told a story about that, my experience with that. That's something that I think the barriers should be as low as possible. If it's more, sometimes looking at a blank page can be really intimidating. So you could write an email. You literally open up your email browser. You probably write a dozen emails a day, so it's an unintimidating way to get into this. Write an email to a person, write a letter to a person. And, that's like this way of it gives us a chance to say directly to that person what, we're too proud or too insecure, or to whatever it is to say in real life. And so but those things need to be said, and so I think it could be helpful to to approach that format of writing a letter to a person.
Yeah, and the next one is to tell the story about an event, a moment or day that the deceased changed you. And that can be a scene. Maybe you have one scene or one memory or a story, but these people, it's really important to honor, and because they do change us. So to honor that and write about it. Do you have anything else about that, Andrew?
I think I'm going to contradict myself a little bit, because I talked about how the letter was so poorly written, but in fact, I think a lot of, if the goal is, well, the goal of good writing in general is clarity, and to communicate as clearly and as beautifully as possible. And the goal of grief, I think, is also clarity, and coming to a sense of clarity with what your feelings are. And so they're not quite, they're parallel goals. Clear writing, strong writing, adds clarity, just as you seek that in your process of grief. And so with the experiential pieces, there's a lot of great examples of what makes a good story. Adding details to what the person looks like, how they talk, how funny, just all the funny things that you remember about this person. Bringing those to life through strong writing will be beneficial, I think, from a therapeutic sense, but also from just a storytelling sense, and the ability to revisit that and experience as vividly as possible a moment with a person that you've lost.
One way I talk about that in my writing groups is to think about the 5 senses. To make a scene really vivid, can you think about sight, colors, sounds are always evocative, smells, taste, temperature. So that gets it in. And the other thing that can really make writing evocative and powerful is really emotional vulnerability. And when you, especially for this expressive or grief writing, you don't have to show it to anyone. This is your chance to kind of let your words flow, to let it pour out. So those specific details can be really important. And also just that emotional vulnerability, giving yourself permission to write it out.
What do you mean by that? Maybe you could just expand on that real quick.
What I find is a lot of times, there's kind of right brain, left brain. And often when we write, one side of our brain wants to edit and control and make it look really good. But especially in my groups, for the first draft, I'm like, this is your first draft. That editor is going to potentially squash your creativity and your emotional vulnerability. So kind of giving yourself permission at first of all, say nobody ever has to read this. And that kind of gives yourself permission to have the safe space to just let it flow out. Let your creativity flow, your memories, your emotions, because later, especially if you're going to publish it or share it, you can always go later and tighten it up and edit it. But as an exercise in just writing in first draft and creative flow, getting it on the page. And sometimes that can be so intimidating, is getting it on the page. And so that's kind of a way to do that and avoid that editor brain.
I would love to just reiterate that, because that's one of the biggest barriers is, where do I begin? Am I doing justice to this person? Don't worry about that. Just let it flow. And the more you can do that, I think the better the writing will be. Okay. Do you want to go into questions?
Sure. And I think there was a few more. I think on that slide there was some more about group and connection too.
Okay.
And I know there's some resources on the American Alpine Club website where there's some online, if you want support, and they have some listings for some people who do online like emailing a prompt every day. You sign up for 30 days and they'll email you a prompt to kind of help as a diving board into your writing. I do.
Why don't you talk about your grief group, writing group that you've put together?
Yeah, sure. And I do that. You're always welcome to reach out. I see clients, and then I also do writing groups. I have memoir writing groups. And that's where I first discovered people are writing about their lives, but often about really difficult events or loss, and kind of taking that raw emotional material and transforming it, and narrating it, putting a narrative around it, which can be really powerful. So the grief groups are just a little more focused on a community of people who are really dealing with grief and loss and death, and providing a safe space for that. So I usually give a quote or a little literary example at the beginning, and then I give a writing prompt, and then I hold the space within the group for everybody to write, usually for about 45 minutes on the prompt, and just like we talked about, just let your words flow, get them on the page. And then in my groups, I give the opportunity at the very end for people to share with each other. And like I said earlier, you don't have to, and it's almost better not to think about sharing it when you write, especially that first draft, just to let it all flow out. But it can be, again, that community or connection aspect of healing can be really important, and just sharing our stories and feeling seen and heard and not alone, because grief can be really isolating. And writing it out is one way to get it out, and connecting with others can be another way to just get support and heal and move through the emotions. And then the last thing is, potentially in the future at the Climbing Grief Fund, looking at submissions. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So at some point we'd like to put together an archive of writing and showcase pieces through the Climbing Grief Fund. And so that's all TBD, but if you want to use these prompts that we've given here as a starting point, start working on those, because I think at some point this summer we'll be able to provide a home for this kind of work. So consider a poem, a letter to the deceased, or just like a great story about a time, day, moment that really changed you. And so I think that's a good starting point for that. All right, let's dive into some questions. The first one I see here is from George B, and he says, how do the seven stages of grief fit into this? And also where/how can someone find help to start writing and or to understand their own feelings, particularly when you're really close to the people? I don't know what the 7 stages of grief are. So are you familiar with that?
Kubler-Ross, there's different stages of grief, denial, there's a whole series, but what they say is they don't always happen in order. Like there's, people think that, if I go through these stages of grief and they happen in order, then you kind of graduate, and it's a journey, and it's unique, and it's an individual, and those stages are going to be individual for everybody. And sometimes denial will come back over and over, or the sadness, the anger, different elements might pop up at different times. And so again, writing can just be a way to process those emotions and those stages when they come, and they're going to be unique and individual to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my own experience with grief has not been one of stages, so I'm not sure. I don't know I guess I should read that work, but it's been surprising to see how stage like it feels. It feels very much just like a day-to-day experience, and you never know what it's going to be. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it's an interesting question, how it is, like you said, going to change day to day. And I think that part of this question, like, how do I even know what my emotions are? Is that what he said?
something like that?
Yeah, I think it can feel so overwhelming. From my background, I've also found it helpful to locate the emotions. They express ourselves in our body. So sometimes it can be like, I feel tight in my chest, my breathing feels shallow, my stomach feels upset. It can be even identifying the sensations in the body. And sometimes that will help us identify the emotions. And they also say just by recognizing them and naming them and labeling them, it gives them less power. It can give them a little bit of softening and release.
Yeah, there's a mindfulness meditation component to that understanding of what you're going through that I'm not sure either of us need to go into right now, but certainly speaks to my understanding of how that functions.
And in my groups, actually, before we go into the writing, I actually do a mindfulness meditation where we sit, we slow our breath, we go inside, and in a way that helps center, I found, grounds me so that then I am in a more conscious place to do my writing. And
Okay, let's just move on to Sarah S. How do you celebrate and honor climbers, loved ones you have lost? I mean, yeah, so I guess through writing, is one great way to do that. One of I think about some of the things that we've done for climbers that we've lost over the years, and like when Sue Knott died, she loved like these very girly pink cocktails, and so we like put Cosmopolitan mix underneath her favorite 512 and rifle that she always loved doing, and had some cocktails in her name. But yeah, I think writing is so powerful because it's that's why people care about that person, is even if you've never met a person, like I dare you to go read Hayden's story on my website and not come away endeared to this amazing person, and feel connected to him in a way that you couldn't do through a picture, through almost any other medium. Like I'm sort of I'm struggling to find a more powerful way to convey who and what a person is than through the writing process. And so being able to pay homage to that is a serious task. And it feels especially momentous in the wake of someone's death. But if you are the person who knew that person best, or who knew that insight into that person, or who knew that unique attribute that, it's in a way, you might feel a little bit of responsibility to share that with people, because why wouldn't you want to share the best parts of your friends who are now dead with the world? And so great writing is a great way to do that.
I think that in memoriam in the American Alpine Journal is really, we were doing this episode, and I lost a friend, Cameron Tate, years ago, and went back and read it. And my friend Kent McClannon wrote the memorial in memoriam for him. And it just is, it brings him back, and it's powerful.
Okay, here's a question for you, Ashley. Do you think it is always necessary for someone to see a therapist/professional after losing a loved one?
As a psychotherapist, I'm biased, but yeah, I think it can be so helpful. One of the benefits of therapy is just being seen and heard. And like I said, grief can be really isolating, and knowing you're not alone. And it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a good friend, family member, but yeah, just a place to process your grief. And it can also be writing, and it can be both. It can be writing and seeing a therapist and being supported in the process, but it's hard to do it alone. And we're humans evolved for connection, and we heal through connection and storytelling. And so that's one of the ways therapy can be really, really powerful.
One of my questions that I would love to know is, do you have any tips for how to find a therapist? Because it seems like it's just there's no Yelp really of therapists, and I don't even know how you would go about the process of vetting the right person to speak to.
You know, there are some resources on the Climbing Grief Fund. They've got some therapists listed by state. I think people just suggest and recommend those therapists who are on there. But it's also going to be sometimes you have to try a couple people before you find a good match. And that's gonna, just like friends, or climbing partners. So it's finding somebody that you resonate with and you really feel heard and safe and held. But that is a resource. Psychology Today has an online database of different therapists, and also just word of mouth. There's a lot of stigma unfortunately, around asking for help, but we can't heal alone. And so somebody who helps somebody else can also be a good resource.
Okay, Andrew and Ashley, do you think that a potential benefit to this type of writing may be to enlighten climbers as to the pain and suffering that they may cause their loved ones if they don't survive a climb? Let me think about that really quickly.
Will you read it again?
Do you think that a potential benefit to this type of writing may be to enlighten climbers as to the pain and suffering that they may cause their loved ones if they don't survive a climb? I don't think that that should be the goal. And I think that's a false idea as well, because no one goes climbing expecting to die. And in fact, if that was the experience of climbing, none of us would love it. If death and the fact that your loved ones would be, in pain and in absence of your loss just because you went out that day was front and center to the experience of climbing, then no one would climb. So it's on some level, yes, we know that what we do is risky and dangerous. And on some level, what everyone does in life is dangerous and risky. And, you can try to parse that out through statistics and through, is driving more risky than climbing? Is go down the line and drive yourself crazy doing that. At the end of the day, climbing comes from a good place of love and passion and connection to the people that you're with when you do it. And so obviously no one wants to die when they go climbing.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what I'm hearing is the difficulty for people left behind, probably trying to grapple and understand, or even family members worried about their loved ones who do climb. And I think in that sense, we're going to do what we love. People are going to do what they love, and things happen. But I think writing can give more understanding. Writers or climbers themselves or whatever we're passionate about. But also writing can be helpful for family members to try to grapple and understand. But what I'm hearing from that question is the love, the family members or people who love a climber and worried about them.
Yeah. It's, the image of seeing, a mother who has lost her son, you can't forget that, and you can't not see that, and you can't understate the power of loss on the inner circle of people. But it's still just a false question, I think. I just don't see the value in it, because it doesn't inform a better, more meaningful way to live, in my mind. If there's, it gets hard,
Yeah,
well, yeah, just to drive this point home, I mean, two of the people who were closest to me, who were climbers, who died from suicide, not from, rock fall or something. And so, it's all risky, and but yeah, we're the best that we can do, you know, is to try to live a good life. Um and of course we're considerate of, you know, I've got two daughters now, so I'm not, you know, I was never a free soloist, but I certainly am not going to start taking that up now. And so, yeah, I think those are personal questions about what people feel comfortable with and what they don't feel comfortable with. And of course, we all have people that we love and who are in our life as loved ones, and we don't want to, you know, we don't want them to. One of the quotes that stands out of my mind, from a conversation I had with my friend Steph Davis, who, in the wake of her death of her husband, Mario Richards, she said, "I wish it was me who had died on that wingsuit base jump, because, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm getting that wrong. She said, I'm glad it wasn't me who died on that wingsuit base jump, because I wouldn't want Mario to experience this pain that I feel for his loss." And that was so powerful, because um, people who do these extremely risky things like wingsuit base jump, like Steph does, have an of extremely deep awareness of who they might leave behind in those moments. Um, for her to say something like that really, it almost sounds callous, but it is so, it is a testament to such love that I don't know how to compare it to anything else. I mean, anyway. Okay, last question. I love writing and have often used it as a tool for processing tough emotions. I recently lost my friend in an ice climbing accident, and I can't find any words to put down. Any tips on getting started? Writing prompts, maybe? Yeah, so, you know, so we talked about that a little bit with the idea of doing a poem or a letter to your friend, or trying to describe an experience, or a moment, or day in the life, something along those
Memory.
lines, a memory. I would, if you're going to go that third route, I would really think about how that person changed you, in the best way possible, because that's going to produce the most meaningful writing, and I think it's going to help you. So don't, you know, don't necessarily choose the best day of this deceased person's life to write about. Write about the best day for you, and with that person.
I like that, Andrew, because I also think that that helps. One of the benefits of writing is finding meaning and looking at how how these people that we love, that we lose, how they change us. That's where we get the meaning.
All right, so thank you for being a part of this Clubhouse Live. And
Andrew,
why don't you just plug your website real quick, and your grief workshop one more time?
oh, thank you. Yeah, it's my name is Ashley Shires, and my website is ashleyshires.com, and you can find more information there about my grief writing groups. I also see clients. And Andrew, do you want to talk about your blog and your podcast?
No, I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to talk about giving to the American Alpine Club.
Thank you.
They're an excellent group. They've really been on the front lines for the climbing community for forever, and so they're sponsored by the community, and you can support them by clicking on the link that we just dropped in the comment field, or texting uniting to 44321. And this Clubhouse Live is an ongoing series that they're putting together. And so there's been some great conversations already with Jimmy Chin and you know, Adrienne Bollinger and Emily Harrington and other great folks like that. So stay tuned for more. And thanks to the American Alpine Club, and thanks to the Climbing Grief Fund, and thanks to you, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay.